Hello everyone, this is Nikita Baid from SteelMint. I'm honored to be a part of the 10th Asia Steel Forum. I'm going to be presenting on the subject changes in the Indian steel industry post COVID-19. Indian steelmakers have been facing many challenges over the last 3 to 4 months due to the COVID-19 pandemic and stringent nationwide lockdowns. Amidst this global crisis, many steel mill owners have to suspend their operations. Several units are facing difficulty in procuring raw materials, while others are dealing with inventory management issues and lack of demand in the market. The lockdown was very stringent in India, and majority of mills will still take some time to resume operations at 60 to 70% of the installed capacity. The government is doing its bit to get the economy back on track by injecting financial stimuli. The integrated steel manufacturers had mainly focused on exports during the lockdown to stay afloat at a time when domestic demand had almost dried up. India produces more than 110 million tons of steel and 3.5 million tons of stainless steel. In such a big market, it will obviously take some time for normal operations to resume at mills. Some of the leading producers have been able to export to China, Taiwan, and other countries in the last few months, and they're still getting good orders, but domestic consumption has definitely come down very drastically because work at all infrastructure projects was affected. Stainless steel, mainly used in the manufacture of white goods and in the infrastructure sector, has taken a huge hit in demand in August 2020. The mills were running at 35% production capacity, the reason for having a high inventory level. Mills imported 70 to 80% of stainless steel scrap and nickel. All mills were struggling for funds. Though not completely out of the woods, there seems to be no looking back for the domestic steel makers, at least price-wise, for the rest of the year. Rising domestic demand, minimal imports, and spike in exports have all forged together to bring the smile back after the COVID-19 induced nightmarish 3-month period starting with the last week of March. Capacity utilization plummeted to a fifth in many cases in April, which slowly started looking up to an average of 46% of the industry in the first quarter. India produced 1.5 million tons of finished steel in April, 5.3 million tons in May, 6 million tons in June, and 6.76 million tons in July. Domestic sales also came down to zilch in April but began to pick up, albeit at a very slow pace with the easing of lockdown. Exports were the only saving grace. At 16.29 million tons, production of crude steel was down by 41.6% in the first quarter compared to the same quarter last fiscal. Consumption was even worse, down 55% to 11.14 million tons. Smaller steel companies were virtually down to their knees. The major ones bled. COVID-19 has posed unparalleled challenges in every aspect of our lives. The scale and threat of this pandemic, along with the uncertainties associated with it, has impacted businesses across the globe, and the domestic stainless steel industry has been no exception. Similar to the effects observed in our industry, steel mills faced disruption in the supply chain production planning. Hence, production in April was completely ceased. From May onwards, as the lockdown was partially eased, there were signs of recovery. The sales volume by the end of May was approximately 30%. Subsequently, the month of June was even better than predicted and doubled to the sales volume. There was an uptick in demand from certain segments like automobile, specifically two-wheelers, and healthcare infrastructure induced by COVID-19. Coming to July, the industry witnessed a revival in demand from traditional consumption centers, which were hit during the lockdown period. We expect sales volumes to improve further, despite a multitude of challenges and weak demand in the domestic demand. In the market, mills were able to capitalize on export opportunities in the months of May and June. Seeing the promising trend, it is estimated that demand for stainless steel will recover from the third quarter of the current fiscal. Assuming that there would be no further abruptions in the economy or unexpected lockdowns in future, it is expected for the operations to touch full capacity utilization and sales volumes to touch pre-COVID levels, starting from the second half of financial year 2020-21. Consumption In the post-nationwide lockdown period, consumption of finished steel starting picking up. One of the major concerns in the pre-COVID quarters for the Indian stainless steel industry was surge in imports and circumvention through countries which have free trade agreements with India. The overall import intensity during Q4 FY20 amounted to nearly 30% of the entire stainless steel market share, forcing domestic industries to operate at reduced capacities. As a result of these distorted market dynamics, margins were under pressure. Another reason for the net loss in Q4 was the exceptional mark-to-market forex loss, though operationally the company remained profitable. The government's focus on self-reliance is expected to help revive demand and boost India's economy. The recently announced National Infrastructure Pipeline, railways, and railway infrastructure, along with the augmented push for construction of roads and highways, are expected to keep the demand of stainless steel stable in the next few quarters. As per the new government guidelines, life cycle costing approach is being considered in infrastructure projects, and this is expected to help stainless steel emerge as the preferred metal in the domains of inland waterways, coastal infrastructure, and public utilities. The government's thrust on reviving the SME ecosystem will also act as an enabler for improving the overall manufacturing ecosystem in the country. India is fairly confident that the Indian industry would gain due to the vacuum created by the absence of Chinese goods in the market. With unique challenges and opportunities in India, COVID-19 will mark an inflection point in most industries. Given the diverse nature of a country, both SMEs and large corporates in India need to be highly agile. Indian stainless steel producers are already manufacturing highly sophisticated, globally benchmarked products. With industrial revolution slowly kicking in, this trend is only going to rise. The domestic industry needs to focus on four areas: better data analysis, more process-oriented innovation and automation, greater awareness of stainless steel at user and influencer level, and a level playing competitive ground against foreign players. Over the last 2 months, Indian steel industry has realized that compliance with regulatory requirements for operating in the times of COVID-19 are essential for the safety of our people on one hand and operationally challenging to ensure on the other hand. Apart from the operational challenges, including less automation, MSMEs have been hurt due to cash flow issues. Fear among employees who are reluctant to rejoin work is also a hurdle in conducting smooth operations. The MSME portion of the stainless steel industry is labor intensive, and presently labor availability is a big challenge. Subdued demand due to weak economic sentiment is adding further uncertainty to the business outlook. Any reasonable forecasting for a clear roadmap is nearly impossible at the moment, and profitability and cash flows constraints are damaging most industries. A new normal with new standard descriptions will be the future for any industry. Primary stainless steel manufacturing activity in India will have opportunities as demand from sectors like auto, pharma, and medical equipment will be emerging year on. Over and above this, the industry will have the opportunity to tap markets within and outside the country that will be vacated by Chinese players and Chinese goods, as started earlier. In fact, the entire stainless steel sector in India is more than prepared in terms of capacity and capability to fill this void as it emerges. Domestic demand tilts scales against steel exports. Traders have been experiencing a lull in terms of export shipments in September after hitting a record high of 2.44 million tons in July. August set the tone for subdued exports trend, of course, with data pointing to possibly far more sober 1.65 million tons, excluding stainless steel as usual, of overseas shipments, a month-on-month decrease of 32.37% over July. September export volumes may hover around 1.5 to 1.75 million tons, adding that not much exports activity is expected from Indian mills in October either. The subdued exports trend is a direct fallout of rising domestic demand. Prices too becoming more lucrative in the homegrown space. Domestic HRC and CRC prices have been hiked multiple times since July 2020. Prices of both HRCs and CRCs were raised by rupees 500 to 700 per ton in early mid-July, and again by INR Vietnam at low prices. A lot depends on how the domestic market reacts in the upcoming festive month. It is difficult to anticipate which direction market or the prices will move in October at this juncture. At present, there is not much exports activity, and all traders are trying to execute their contracts, which were booked in as early as June. July shipments have been delayed to October for some traders. Overall, from April to August provisional 2020, steel exports touched 9.46 million tons against 4.09 million tons in the same first 5 months of 2019 to 2020, a more than 130% rise year on year. And a lion's share of this quantum had been going into China, but which subsequently decreased. India usually consumes around 25 million tons of steel in a quarter. From March till August 2020 has consumed around 25 million tons. However, now all the steel consuming sectors are looking up. Auto, which had declined by 75% in the April-June quarter compared to the same quarter last fiscal year, is trying to come back. Construction, which had been completely stalled, has resumed post-monsoons. Towards the end of the year, infrastructure and construction projects get a push, and there is the pressure of project closures as well. And that is good news because construction is the biggest steel consumer at more than 50% share at a conservative estimate. The subdued exports trend is a direct fallout of the rising domestic demand, with prices too becoming more lucrative in the homegrown space. Moreover, there's a supply crunch in CRCs due to maintenance issues in a few steel mills, it seems. Except for one leading integrated steel major, no other player were particularly active in overseas shipments in September. This mill started with deals at USD 495 ton FOB and ended up with booking at USD 520 per ton FOB. Chinese domestic and equivalent export prices kept rising until early September. However, for the last 2 weeks, Chinese prices had been seeing more corrections. China's domestic demand was high, and hence the market was in a position to command strong domestic prices. There was no pressing need for overseas sales, and so export prices remained firm too. However, now a destination like Vietnam, where China was totally absent till August till this year, has become the lowest price source for the Asian country. Offers from China were ruling at around USD 515 to 520 CFR Vietnam. But Indian mills are selective now and will not look at Vietnam or Southeast Asia or any other low price destination on account of their own strong domestic sales. Although few local steel majors are eyeing Europe as the prices have started trending there. Domestic sales are still strong and a better net sales realization giver. This gap has narrowed from the levels of INR 6,500 to 7,000 per ton around a month back, but still domestic sales look more attractive. The price gap has narrowed essentially because of a rise in export prices in tandem. Stainless steel prices are dynamic and a factor of the demand-supply dynamics. Since various factors have an impact on the prices, it is difficult to estimate the direction of the price trend as of now. If there's a weak demand for stainless steel in the architecture, building, and construction segment, then it is usually balanced by other segments like automobiles, railways, and transport. Hence, the industry experts believe that the overall demand for stainless steel should remain strong. Secondly, as indicated earlier, stainless steel demand has a direct correlation with the GDP growth of the country. So factors like overall market sentiment and economic activity act as determinants of stainless steel prices. Thirdly, competition and dumping of goods into the country also sometimes act as pricing detriments. Last, but definitely not the least, raw material costs, input costs govern stainless steel prices to a great extent. Importing countries from January to July imports amounted to around 10.45 million tons, and India's main exporting countries were led by China, followed by Vietnam, Nepal, UAE, and others. China's imports from India, as per our data, amounted to 3.43 million tons over January to July 2020, followed by Vietnam at 1.97 million tons, 0.66 million tons to Nepal, 0.53 million tons to the UAE, and 3.43 million tons to other countries. China traditionally also imports from Japan and South Korea, the dominant trading partners. However, due to the slowdown, exports from these countries were affected. That created a gap in the Chinese market, which would be exploited by Indian mills. Domestic demand in China had picked up sharply after the lockdown, finished for finished flats, finished longs, and semi-finished or billets. We have also noticed that it is mainly finished flats which have found the most takers in India's exports markets. Over May to July, finished flats exports were at 3.71 million tons, whereas finished longs were at 0.45 million tons and billets were at a substantial 2.86 million tons. Export prices in September October are likely to remain elevated, but whether deals will be struck at these levels will remain to be seen. Many traders hazard that a select few Indian mills will be active in October, provided deals are struck at meaty price levels. Chinese prices have been retreating, China too is lessening its imports. Again, the same reason why Indian domestic prices have gone up and accordingly export prices as well. A few weeks back, Chinese domestic prices were equivalent to USD 540 to 550 per ton CFR. Indian export prices were also at similar levels if offered to China. Previously, Chinese domestic prices were at USD 450 per ton CFR levels, whereas Indian offers were at USD 430 to 440 ton levels. So there is no point in buying from India as Indian HRC prices attract an additional 3 to 3% import duty in China. There's a bit of silence in Southeast Asian markets as well. Here, buyers are quiet too, but mills prices had been hovering around USD 520 to 540 per ton FOB. Export prices are up because domestic markets across South Asian economies like Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, etc., are looking up, allowing these economies to up their export prices. Such a scenario bodes well for Indian steelmakers opening up homegrown demand opportunities. Thus, exports do look less attractive under such circumstances. November onwards, winter sets in China when the country usually goes in for production cuts due to environmental reasons. But at the same time, if steel consuming industries close down during winter, then Chinese mills would look to export too. Of course, it's not possible to predict China's buying trend at this juncture, but as of now, it is bullish on buying from India. Where India is concerned, generally demand from steel starts picking up from November onwards after the festive season ends, when prices too head northward, and this trend is driven by demand and cost of raw materials. However, last year went against the trend. Demand was low, domestic traders did not purchase much from the mills, and prices languished. Hence, exports of finished flats, finished long, and semi-finished were on the higher side in October-December 2019 to make up for lack of domestic appetite. However, domestic demand started picking up from January 2020, and from mid-January till February it remained high, which in turn led to a drop in exports. Mills increased prices, and traders who sell the material to the retailers did restocking because they needed to feed the pent-up demand in the market. Infrastructure and construction projects get a push towards fiscal end. Traders had not been buying heavily since September 2019, but dealing in small quantities due to lack of domestic requirements. So once demand resumed, traders started booking heavy orders. In fact, March saw a sharp drop in exports to 0.83 million tons, which meant domestic demand was on the higher side. It may be mentioned that prior to the lockdown, domestic demand was showing signs of recovery because COVID-19 had already entered other nations, forcing them into lockdowns, especially Europe and the Middle East. This in turn forced the Indian mills to focus more on the domestic. Behind this trend lies is increasing demand for rebars in the domestic market. Longs comprise mainly of wire rods and TMT bars. India is not self-sufficient in wire rods production, so whatever is manufactured at home is sold to the domestic market, leaving little else for exports. The scenario is similar with TMT Power's market. However, the scenario suddenly changed from the end of March after the nation went into lockdown from the morning of March 24, 2020, with exports rising sharply from 0.78 million tons in April to 2.31 million tons in May. Going forward, export prices in September-October 2020 are likely to remain elevated. Government plans to help the Indian stainless steel industry bounce back. Although COVID-19 is a setback in India's growth story, it is believed that a comeback is always greater than any setback. The government has already mooted a bold plan for self-reliance, indicating that the indigenous industry will be prioritized above imports in the post-COVID India. To do that, while also keeping prices competitive for customers, the government will need to expedite projects that increase our industry's competitiveness. Like I said, plans like the National Infrastructure Pipeline will create many opportunities for stainless steel. The health and medical industry, which has long needed revamp, has opened up new avenues for production of equipment and infrastructure. Global companies shifting base out of China can be a blessing in disguise for positioning India as the new manufacturing hub. As the subsidized Chinese industries of auto components, white goods, pharmaceuticals, electronics, etc., vacate global markets, the Indian steel industry can more than fill the gap. There is adequate capacity and expertise in the country to do this while meeting existing demand of stainless steel from various segments. As stainless steel is inherently hygienic and safe, this metal stands to gain immensely from the growth in the health sector. Besides, stainless steel gains over any other material in life cycle costing, which makes it the most economical choice for a lot of major industries. This metal is absolutely aligned with the government's drive to find sustainable solutions in the post COVID-19 world, where these factors will assume critical value. Stainless steel is bound to emerge as a top choice.